Hello guys, Charles here and welcome back to my channel. So today I thought I would break down a concept which I've referenced a lot in the past, but I realise I've never actually done a video outlining it, so that's what this one is today. This is the chord scale known as the 6th diminished scale, and if you've spent any time on jazz YouTube, you've encountered the Barry Harris videos, you'll have no doubt heard of the 6th diminished scale. So the 6th diminished scale is simply the major bebop scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, flat 6, 6, 7. By adding that extra note to our major scale, our lines will resolve back onto whichever note we started on if we play eighth notes. Easier to demonstrate than it is to explain. That would sound like this. Here's your normal major scale. And adding in that flattened sixth. So by adding in that one note, my scale now resolves nicely onto the beat. So the 6th diminished scale is that exact set of notes, but when we discuss it in terms of its harmonic content. So you could think of this as the 6th diminished chord scale or a bebop chord scale, or simply the bebop scale, however best works for you. For today I'm going to refer to it as the 6th diminished scale. So Barry talks about all the colours that live within this scale, and there's so many different sounds available to us. So I thought today we'd break it down in a systematic approach so that we can really target some of those interesting sounds within this chord scale. So for all of these examples, I'm just going to use the middle four strings of the guitar, strings 2, 3, 4 and 5. Remember, I've got a 7th string here. But of course, as with any concept, you need to know this in all positions all over the guitar. But so that we can compare to one another, we'll stick to string set 2, 3, 4 and 5. So first of all, we're going to play this in its purest sense, the true 6th diminished. And all we need to do that is to play a C6 chord, we'll do these all in C, and a diminished chord. Now at this point, we're simply going to use the technique that we discussed in the chord rotations video. You're going to really struggle with chord scales if you can't get your head around that chord rotations idea. So do check that out before you dive into this. So all we do is we take that C6 chord. Now remember, C6 is the same as an A minor 7. So if we then rotate that once into its next inversion or position, we're now up on the 7th fret, 7, 7, 5, 8, which is this A minor chord, like an A minor 7 there. If we rotate it again, we're here on 10th fret. And if we rotate it again, we're here on the 12th fret with that classic A minor 7 shape. And rotate it once more, and we're back on that C6 voicing. So if we take those 4 voicings and back where we came from, we're simply going to put a diminished chord in between each of those. Now remember, this diminished chord, that is technically rotating as well, but the voicing doesn't change because it's a symmetrical chord. So our diminished chords are just going to look like this. And we're going to simply add those in. And we're back where we came from. So moving from a 6th to a diminished is obviously where the name comes from. 6th diminished, 6th diminished. So obviously you can see how you need to know your chord rotations. Now, although we're only going to look at the major 6th diminished scale today, there are other types of chord scales that Barry talks about a lot, including a minor 6th diminished scale, so you can sort of get a sense of where this would be going. If you're still unsure about the concept of a chord scale, please do check out my explanation video up here, where I break it down and really get into the nitty-gritty of what a chord scale really is and how to build them. So now let's go through the separate intervals that exist within this scale. So let's just start by looking at the seconds that we get. So a second is just the next door notes. And these by themselves are going to sound a bit weird, but we'll come back to how to use these in a moment. So these are just 2 notes at a time. Next we need to know our scale in thirds. So again, we're just playing chord scales in thirds. Okay, so some interesting sounds there. Now, like I say, by themselves, seconds don't sound too great, but if you think of them as a tension and you think of the third as a release, you get some really interesting sounds like this. All those tensions and releases live within this scale. So next up, let's try the same chord scale, but instead of starting on a 6th chord, let's see what happens if we start on a 7th chord. So in this case, it's a major scale, so of course it would be a major 7th chord. Now, by simply adding that one extra note, we end up with some really interesting harmony when compared to the major chord scale. So it generates some really interesting, almost quartal sounds in the middle there. Remember, we discussed quartal harmony in the R fourths a minor interval video. Again, you can check that out up here if you want to understand fourths a little bit better. So on the subject of fourths, what happens if we start with a quartal chord and move our way through this chord scale? Well, let's find out. And like I say, you need to know this chord scale in loads of different ways. Now, we were talking about fifths the other day, and I realised I've never actually tried this scale constructed with a fifths-based chord. So I suppose you call that quintile harmony. I now realise the reason I've never done that before is because it's really tricky. So let's have a little listen to some of those sounds if we build our first chord in fifths. I had to really slow that one down there. I'll need to work on that. Some really tricky stuff, but some lovely voicings. So hopefully you've got the general concept of this scale now, and when we discuss it in future videos, you'll know what we're talking about. But as you can see, we've got some really wonderful colours and some clashes. Having two semitones in a row is a very rare thing inside a scale. I can't off the top of my head think of another scale apart from the chromatic scale that has that. So make sure that you really get to grips with these colours, at least using the 6th and the diminished movement and that chord rotation concept. And of course, thirds and sixths are really important colours for most of the sound worlds we deal with in jazz as well. So make sure you've got to grips with those. Fourths and fifths are fun, but of course they are slightly more challenging to apply unless you're in a very stripped back setting, or of course writing your own music, in which case go for it. Leave a comment down below letting me know what else you would like to see covered on this channel. Please do give this video a like, subscribe, ding the notification bell, and share with any of your friends who would benefit from this information. And as always, I hope you're all doing very well, getting plenty of practice in, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers!
Roll up, let me embed a story you'll never forget. A drip, drip, you're drowning in debt now. You can't buy your way out. And I heard you find it difficult to cope well. Here by this bottle full of hope.